Welcome to the Embassy Pod. I'm your host, Sambo, and together with the team at the U.S. Embassy in Ulaanbaatar, we're pleased to present the 6th episode of our official podcast series in Mongolia. Through this series, we're hoping to bring you conversations with people in our embassy and the American community who live, study, and work here. And today's episode is quite special for two reasons, actually. The very first reason is that, as you can quite literally see, we're trying out the video format for the first time with this episode. And we understand that our audience prefers video over audio, and we want to make sure that our content is available and accessible to as many people as possible. We're also happy to announce that we're going to be doing another series of podcasts in Mongolian language, and that too will be in video format. So make sure you follow our social pages at USEMB Mongolia and look out for that news. And the second reason why this episode is quite special is because we finally have the guest that a lot of our audience have been anticipating and waiting for ever since this project had started. People know him as this guy whose tweets are mostly about monasteries, murals, and walks around town. But I know him as our boss, who poses the most difficult questions to those museum guides and monks and other people that he meets. Mr. Ambassador, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Very happy to have you. So you've been here for almost 3 years now. And since you came here, a lot has happened. Our two countries' bilateral relationship has ascended to a strategic partnership, and both of our countries have had successful elections and have now new presidents. What has changed and what has remained unchanged?
I think that what remains unchanged is sort of the fundamentals of the relationship, which is to say, we're both democracies. We both consider that important, and it very much strikes me being here in Mongolia, how important that is to Mongolians, and of course, Americans value that tremendously as well. So those fundamentals are important. The importance we attach, I think, to each other, I at least speak for the U.S., but I hope for Mongolia as well, is also another one of those themes of continuity. But the change is quite dramatic, and I feel really lucky as the ambassador at a time of ascension, as you called it, to a strategic partnership, to be here, because we've really seen an uptick in the relationship in very practical ways. So we've got new programs, new ways of supporting one another, new dialogue between our two countries, which is very useful. And I think the most important part of that is that it continued through the COVID period, which is still, of course, ongoing, unfortunately. But I think the most important thing is that it did continue at a very brisk pace, I'm happy to say, despite some changes. Obviously, we couldn't have visitors going one way or the other in the amounts we had before. But even more importantly, it bodes extremely well for the future, and I'm very optimistic that the relationship is just going to continue on that upward slide that we've seen.
As I mentioned earlier, your tweets are mostly about museums and monasteries and places that you visit around town. And oftentimes what we see is our audience commenting under your post saying that they've never seen this museum or monastery before ever in their life, even though they're Mongolians living in Mongolia for their lifetime. I mean, where does this passion for arts and culture come from? Do you do art yourself?
Oh, I don't do art. I don't do visual art, definitely not. But I do really enjoy it, and so does my wife. And we get out a lot, as you say. But I hope it's not only about visiting monasteries and museums and so forth. But I think anywhere we serve, I'm always talking about my wife and me. We really like to not only understand, sort of what a diplomat's supposed to formally understand, the politics, the economics, but understand the culture and understand the people. And that just means really getting out a lot. And in this country, I think it's in a way a little bit easy because people are very friendly and welcoming. So I'm always looking for new opportunities to see new things And I'm just really a strong believer, but it's been true everywhere we've been, that the more you understand the country, the more it helps the relationship. And it certainly helps the embassy to better explain to our folks back in Washington what's going on here, what significance it has, how we can develop it better. So, we love the cultures in their own right. And one of the things that really we love here is the traditions of Mongolia. So when we go to a monastery or other such place, we're really seeing, I would say, almost like the history of Mongolia. And we always love to get out and meet new people as well. So that's part of it. And in other words, it's not new to Mongolia, but it's something that we can do very nicely in Mongolia because people are so friendly and because there's so much of interest to us. And frankly, because this is the first time that we've served in a country that has such a strong Buddhist culture. In the past, it's been other cultures. So, every time we come to a new place, there's a lot to learn. And yes, we've been here, it's under 3 years, but getting on toward 3 years. But there's still an awful lot to learn. And every time we go somewhere, we're just learning more and more and more.
I see. And one of the skills I think that helps you a lot when you're going out to those places and meeting people, locals, especially in the countryside, you speak Russian with them. And because a lot of Mongolians speak Russian, I think it helps you to communicate with them better. And sometimes I find myself just standing there, not understanding anything, and you end up explaining what he said to me back. And what languages do you speak besides Russian, and what other countries, as you mentioned, you've previously served?
Yeah. I mean, I'll start with a little discordant note, which is to say, I'm really sorry my Mongolian hasn't gotten better than it is. I'm beginning to understand more and more, but speaking is something I haven't conquered yet. It takes a lot of effort, and I don't have that much time to do it. So I wish I could speak Mongolian, because then we'd be doing even more of what we're doing. But yes, Russian has proven very helpful here. Curiously enough, even Polish, I've met people here who speak Polish, Mongolians. That's kind of a cool thing too.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've served in several countries already. We served several times in Russia and in Kazakhstan. So that's some of the reasons that our Russian is, pretty good, I guess you'd say. Always lots of room to improve on the Russian as well. And I keep meaning to read more books in Russian just to keep the pace reasonably adequate, let's put it that way. But aside from that, we've served several times in the Philippines, 3 times. So I speak a sort of a passable Filipino. Served in Geneva, and indeed I speak French. Poland, so I do speak Polish. And I served in Iraq, which was one of the most fascinating experiences of my diplomatic career. So it's been other than serving in Washington, which I've of course done as well. All of us need to do that, and it's important that we do that. But serving abroad in a variety of countries has been really, I would say, a cool part of the overall career experience.
Wonderful. So compared to all those countries that you've named, does Mongolia stand out? How does Mongolia stand out?
Oh, I mean, in many ways, the culture here is very different than any of the other countries that we've been in. But I would say that every country has its unique cultures and sort of patterns, and I think those are fascinating everywhere. But in Mongolia, I think one of the things that stands out here, every country, of course, values its traditions. But here we've seen it very clearly in ways that I think maybe is a little bit stronger than in other countries. I always think when somebody hands me a snuff bottle,
right,
I'm always thinking that it's not just handing me the snuff bottle, which I now have learned properly how to receive and do, but it's also it really kind of reflects hundreds and hundreds of years of history, and I'm always kind of aware of that when that happens. So that kind of tradition is very striking and very enjoyable to learn more and more about. So in many ways, this country stands out. It's in my opinion, a very thriving democracy. And as I said earlier, I think Mongolians very much value the rights that they have under a democratic system. I think the responsibilities that come with that as well. I'm always struck, for instance, by the strength of social media here, the fact that social media is not censored, I think, is a very important quality of a strong democracy in today's world. And that's something that's, I really admire. But we always have to keep an eye out. We always have to keep an eye out in every democracy to keep it vibrant, because it's an ongoing process, evolutionary process. And, the public really has to be aware of what it means to have a democracy and really defend it. That's true in every country.
And those photos with your snuff bottles, those are always the most popular posts that we have. So I think what you mean is true in the sense that a lot of our followers actually appreciate you showing the respect for the culture. And those are the posts that are always, the most shared, the most followed, and most liked. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Nice to hear. Yeah.
So that's the reason that we're doing here right now. I want to talk a little bit about Millennium Challenge Corporation now. It has come to enforce in 2021. What does it mean, and what are the benefits for Mongolia?
When we talk about the Millennium Challenge Corporation's second compact coming into force, what that really means is that we've done the preparatory work. The preparatory work for a project that's $350 million of American funding, plus some Mongolian contribution as well. It obviously takes some effort, and it takes a while. So now, indeed, we will be starting the actual physical work that goes with it. But I think it's, first of all, a vote of confidence from our side in Mongolia. Not every country gets a second compact. So the fact that the first one was handled very well really was something that was taken note of in Washington by the MCC folks. It's important that it's a grant, not a loan. So there's sort of no debts involved.
Right.
But of course, there are responsibilities that that the Mongolian side bears, including implementing it. And that's another important element of the MCC, is that it's always the host country that does most of the implementing with support from the U.S. And that indeed is happening here. And that's called the MCA. And it's a Mongolian staffed entity that is doing the actual implementation with our support. So that's another important element. Beyond that, I would say the fact that the idea really came from the Mongolian side when we were thinking about what kind of a major project to undertake here in Mongolia for the second compact. I think that was important. And it seems that, from everything I know, it was a good choice, because the Ulaanbaatar's water situation may not be noticeable in terms of the challenges ahead, but from all the assessments of experts, problems are on the horizon unless they are addressed, and addressing them in advance before they become a crisis, I think is very important. So that's another kind of lesson that we drew from the overall undertaking, is that we work together, we work with the Mongolian government and civil society to figure out what direction to take in terms of the second compact. It's always important to stress the MCC, which, by the way, is not that old. It's an institution that hasn't been around for that many years. Was a different kind of development support project by the United States. Initially, it was kind of seen, if I remember correctly, as a little bit of an experiment, but I think it's an experiment that succeeded. So it really has two elements to it. So one, of course, is the one that's coming into force in the entry into force now, which is the actual work that is done. But there's a lot of governance initiatives that go with it. There have been training, for instance, in how to do contracts for such a major project in a transparent way. Transparency obviously being important to fight corruption. And that is as much, in my opinion, an important element as the actual construction itself. So we're in a way doing what Americans love to use the term best practices. But the best practices are very, very important. It's our way of trying to convey how we view the importance of transparency and how to do it in a way that makes for a very clean and honest process that gives the most benefit, obviously, to the people of Ulaanbaatar. So we're very excited about it. It's a real positive step. We were very much looking forward to the entry into force. Glad that the foreign minister took part in the ceremony. And as I say, I think now we have begun the work that will lead to really addressing a challenge that, if not faced, would become much more serious in the future.
COVID-19 has obviously had a major impact on your work here. How has the US and Mongolia working together to fight this pandemic?
There's a recognition, obviously, that all countries are in this together. It's an international challenge. And that's something that really has motivated our administration to be supportive. So the U.S. has been supportive in many ways of Mongolia. Some of it is in terms of vaccines. Other of it has involved providing protective equipment, ventilators, which are unfortunately but very vitally important. Other elements that are essential to help doctors, frontline workers fight this challenge. And it's, by the way, worth giving a little nod, so let me do that, to the frontline workers who really have a tremendous challenge before them, both in Mongolia and the United States, really throughout the world. So we really admire them, I must say. But for our part, it's kind of a dual-track system, I guess you'd say. So on the one hand, there's the bilateral support, some of that I mentioned already. And then the Biden administration has taken a multilateral approach of supporting international institutions. In this case, COVAX facility is one of the central features of that, to provide vaccines and other support to countries. So we've seen this as very important for the United States and Mongolia. We're very glad that we can be helpful. And it's very gratifying when we do announce these to hear expressions of appreciation. By the way, Mongolia last year supported the U.S. as well with a $1 million grant donation. It was important. It was important symbolically, but actually it was important in terms of timing to support one particular group that was facing real serious challenges in the United States. So, nobody wants COVID to be taking place right now. Obviously, we all want to be behind this, but in order to be behind this, we have to support one another. And I guess that's the broader significance of our collective effort to fight this pandemic.
One of the things that, as a social media person, that I appreciate you is the amount of social media presence that you have, and you've taken new approaches like the Ask the Ambassador campaign, and joining the Lunar New Year greeting video that we did. What has been the public reaction to your social media postings, and what, as you briefly mentioned earlier, you see the importance of the social media and its role in democracies. Are you worried about disinformation and misinformation? What do you see? How do you see the Mongolian social media sphere, if I could call it that, in its role in Mongolian democracy?
Yeah, social media has become vital, and it's yet another of the means by which the public can express its views. Obviously, it is all over the world something that has to be kept an eye on in terms of misinformation, disinformation. So, in fact, the embassy has had some programs to try to help media figures sort out as best they can what is disinformation, and really how to be aware that this is a challenge in order to address it. It's not easy, I have to say. All countries are facing the same problem. But disinformation and misinformation aside, we found it a very interesting and important tool to talk to the public, to communicate with the public, and for the public to communicate back with us. I'm very gratified that people follow our embassy site, and it's really nice when people react. So it's something fairly new for me as well. I had never been quite as active as I am now on social media, but I find it a nice, useful tool, and I'm very happy that we have I think the embassy has a very strong social media site and presence. It's you deserve a lot of the credit as well,
Oh,
and our embassy team overall. So, we're always, I think, very interested in new ideas for social media that might respond to the desires of the public to share more information, present our perspective. So I think these podcasts are another. It's still a little bit maybe an experimental stage. We've only done 6 of them, and now we're doing it in this new format. I think that with something as dynamic as social media, creativity and willingness to try something innovative is always really important. So I think that's something that motivates all of us at the embassy.
I think you put it perfectly. One of the things that we try to do on social media is to tailor to our audience's preferences.
Exactly.
And on top of that list, basically, is exchange opportunities, resources to learn English, and opportunities to study in the U.S. And you've talked about this in depth in your Ask the Ambassador campaign, and we've done podcast episodes with our public affairs officer and the consular section chief, actually, in our previous episodes, talking about those topics. But I think one of the reasons why our audience wants and searches for those kinds of information is because they're young and mid-career professionals who are looking to improve their, personal skills and challenge themselves to become better. Today I just wanted to ask you for your advice to them to take the next chapter in their lives.
Interesting. I don't want to sound like I'm giving, sort of deep, profound advice, but and it always strikes me that the more opportunities you are made aware of, the better your choices are likely to be. That's what motivates us. Obviously, we're conveying or describing opportunities, for instance, to study English or to study in the United States, and of course, some people will take us up on that and others won't, but I think it's very important that we highlight those opportunities so people know they're out there. But I guess my general principle is the more you know and the more you know what you don't know even, the more you'll make intelligent choices in the end that will be that could lead to really fantastic things. So I'm always a big fan of broadening one's horizons as much as possible. Again, that's one of the reasons I go to all these museums and stuff, is I'm just learning more about different aspects of life in Mongolia, life in general. And that's kind of my, if I had to give sort of advice, I don't know how wise the advice is, but I don't think you can go wrong by learning more and more and more about everything that interests you. And I think that's a great way to create new possibilities.
Amazing. Speaking of your adventures, I think you've been to the new airport, right? The Genghis Khan International Airport. What was your impression? And I wanted to connect that to the fact that before the COVID happened, the number of American tourists in Mongolia hit an all-time high. So when the travels are available again, do you anticipate more students, travelers, tourists, and researchers through our programs and Peace Corps?
Yes. As for the airport, I'm very impressed. It's really nice. It was very well organized. We were there on the airport's second day, new airport's second day in operation, and it was a really good experience. But I think you have to see it in the broader context of more tourism and more ties with the world, right? And a new airport is an incentive for people to come because they arrive at a nice, sparkling, clean, well-organized airport. But yes, we were indeed, before COVID hit, seeing a steady rise, really, in the number of Americans and foreigners in general coming to Mongolia. And I think that will pick up again. There's every reason to think so. I think part of the reason to be optimistic is Mongolia itself is becoming even better known in the United States than it was previously. Culture is one reason, and the WHO is obviously, a significant factor, I have to say. But it's one of many reasons why more and more people are, I think, aware of Mongolia now and are intrigued by Mongolia. But of course, Mongolia still has to continue developing its tourism infrastructure because, tourists want to have a good experience, a fulfilling experience. And there's obviously room for improvement. We've discussed this with the government and are looking for ways to help. And one of the small ways, because I think it's a nice little example of very practical ways that we've helped and are helping, is we've developed an online course, what they call a MOOC, to help those in the tourism sector improve their English. Because it obviously is important for foreign tourists to be able to communicate readily without an interpreter. And we're really excited about that MOOC. It's in some ways, you might say a small initiative, but I think it can, along with many other things, have a real big impact. So we're trying to be helpful in this and in so many other ways, in practical, very practical terms. And that's another one of those approaches that really motivates us and that is always high in our mind when we're working on cooperative projects.
Right. And you mentioned the tourism MOOC, but we also have, a lot of other MOOCs for media journalists and all the other, specific sectors that people, if our audience wants to check that out, you can join our social media and look out for that link as well. The next question that I have for you is very simple, actually. What is your favorite part? What is the favorite part of your job?
Well, I mean, I'm very honored and proud to be able to serve my country. That's true. And it really is something that underlies, I think, all that I do. But aside from that, which is fundamental to to any diplomat, right, to serve their country, it's exactly what we were talking about earlier, the opportunity to learn about the countries in which I serve, to meet interesting people, and to get a real deep understanding of how a country operates, works, what are the underlying traditions and principles that guide it, what people are thinking. So that's been really one of the enjoyable parts of my job everywhere. When you're a diplomat, you meet really fascinating and cool people wherever you are. And everywhere I've been, I've really been lucky to be able to meet people, sometimes what you might call historical people, right?
Right.
That's really one of the coolest parts of being a diplomat. And it is very much true here as well.
So besides art that we've discussed in depth, what other hobbies do you have, and how have you passed time during the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, I think we've made the best of the COVID period. Do a lot of reading. When it was possible, we were walking around the city, and I particularly was walking around the city, getting to know it well. Unfortunately, it was obviously very difficult to go outside the city, impossible to go outside the city for long stretches. But those kinds of things, sometimes, when life doesn't allow you to have that much time to sit around and read great books or whatever. So, the silver lining one of the silver linings, at least, to COVID was it allowed people to do that. And I certainly took advantage of that. I read books that I hadn't ever read in my life, or that I read, many, many years ago, and I reread them. Obviously, you always have to be aware, and you have to be sensitive to both the health risks of COVID and just the signal that it sends, the way you behave during the COVID period. And I hope I've been sensitive to that. But all I can say is we've made the best of it. I think we've at least tried to make the best of it. And that we will continue as long as we have to do that.
Awesome. So that's all the questions that I have had for you. But through the first 5 episodes of our podcast, we've tried to set this tradition that we end each episode with what we call a rapid fire segment, where you have to answer all the questions really fast with the first thought that comes to your mind.
Okay.
If you're good with that, I just wanted to hit you with a few couple of questions.
Okay.
Favorite museum?
Oh, whenever I'm in New York, I always go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's fantastic. It's wide-ranging. And lately, I've discovered it has some Mongolian works as well. So there's an added aspect. But
Right. Favorite historical site?
Whenever I'm in Washington, I always make it a point to go to the Lincoln Memorial because it means so much to so many people. And it's a really nice symbol. So it's a symbol of a history that is important to our country.
Favorite food?
Oh, people will be surprised, I think, but I love to make fried tomatoes with bread and this, I guess it's a Caucasian sauce called ajika. I know at least some Mongolians that know what ajika is. Maybe I'm not sure that everyone does.
Right.
But it's weird, but it's kind of my comfort food.
Do you have a Mongolian favorite food?
Yeah, I mean, this is hushur time and I've eaten some really good hushur over the last week. So that's probably my favorite.
Coffee, tea, or sutete?
Coffee, definitely.
Favorite book?
I have several favorites, but there's a massive tome, I guess you'd say, by one of the great American biographers, probably the greatest American biographer, if I can put it that way, about a guy who developed the New York City road infrastructure, Robert Moses. It's called The Power Broker. The author is somebody who really writes great biographies analyzing how power is wielded. And that's probably my favorite book. I've read it several times.
Favorite movie?
It's an oldie, but I love The Graduate. It's from the 1960s, I guess it is, but it really captures the spirit of that period.
Nice one. Favorite sports team and or athlete?
I guess I like sports teams that have a strong team ethic, which is to say, where the teamwork is what gives the team its success. So from my youth, the New York Knicks of the old days, Knickerbockers as we call them, had a really great team spirit that led to some real great successes. But that's what I'm always looking for in a sports team. I know that Mongolians are very strong in individual sports, and that is another sort of form of accomplishment. But for me, I'm always fascinated by how teamwork leads to greater success.
Favorite artist?
So there's a lot, obviously, but one of them maybe isn't really that well known in Mongolia, maybe not even that well known in the United States, but there's an impressionist American painter called Child Hassam. And he paints beautiful pictures, I think mostly of New York, that I like very much. So every time I'm in a museum that has this artist, I make a beeline to see his work.
The most inspirational figure in your life?
Oh, well, it would be wise for me, but also true to say that my wife really inspires me an awful lot. So
I think we all expected that. Favorite holiday?
I love Thanksgiving. It's a great American holiday because it highlights family traditions and traditions themselves. So.
The top 3 must-see sites in your hometown, New York.
Interesting. I guess the New York City skyline is one, and it's what it always symbolizes to me is a dynamic place, an ever-changing place, and a place that is at the cutting edge. There's a lot of places from where you can see the New York City skyline, but one of them is in Brooklyn Heights, right across the river from where the skyline is perhaps most visible, right? So that's one. I guess if I had to answer in 1 word, 2 words, the Brooklyn Heights skyline. Number 2, interestingly enough, I guess you'd say, I live when I'm in New York in a neighborhood that's very multi-ethnic, remarkably multi-ethnic, and I always think that's a really cool place, precisely because it brings together so many different ethnic groups, people from all over the world, and they lead to harmonious whole that is much bigger than its component parts. And I think that's a nice symbol of the United States, too, and something that a lot of us Americans really, really value. And definitely I do.
That's two.
And that's two. And the third one, I guess you'd say, is the New York City Library, because it's a fantastic library with a beautiful interior, and it really kind of evokes the spirit of scholarship, but also the spirit of doing the scholarship in a beautiful setting, historic setting. So that's another place I think I would bring tourists if they were coming to New York. There's an awful lot, but maybe those three are pretty good examples.
The first thing you'll do once the pandemic is over?
Yeah, one of the biggest disappointments of the pandemic was that we love having visitors from abroad, and we love, especially now that we know Mongolia even better, to be able to show them this country. And the fact that people haven't been able to come to visit us, from our friends from all over the world, has been, I must say, a bit disappointing, obviously. So, when the possibility again becomes realistic, we very much are looking forward to having our friends come visit so we can show them this country.
So that's all the questions that I have for you, Ambassador. We really appreciate coming on to the podcast. Before we started recording, I remember that you said that you were very bored of yourself and you think you're very boring. But I think our audiences beg to differ, and they really appreciate your posts with your snuff bottles and Mongolian Dales giving greetings on holidays. So we really are appreciative of you coming on, and we hope that you'll receive many, many more guests once the pandemic is over. So thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you. Pleasure.
That's it from us today. Thanks to our listeners for supporting our newest project and sticking with us until the end. If you liked this episode, please share with your friends and leave us a review on whichever platform you're listening on. If you have any comments or criticism on how we can improve, please write to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at USEMB Mongolia. And of course, if you'd like to learn about all the exchange, scholarship, and other public programs that the embassy has to offer, please visit our website at mn.usembassy.gov. Please wear masks, wash your hands, keep social distancing, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Embassy Pod.